Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So today we're talking about a second Amartya article, equality of what? So equality, as Sen notes, is a fundamental concept in morality. We've been talking a lot about rights. Now we're shifting gears. We're going to talk about equality. And in this article, it was a lecture that he gave in '79 that's been anthologized, right? Sen takes aim at utilitarian equality, utilitarian conceptions. A second one that he calls total utility equality. You see, he uses a strange term from economics, lexemin, to describe that, and then Rawlsian conceptions of equality. The long and short of it is that for Rawls, none of the three conceptions, the utilitarian conception, the lexemin conception, or the Rawlsian conception, can adequately convey what equality is, or what it should be, right? And he makes a stronger claim that no combination of those three views can make an adequate conception of equality, right? One that would be adequate to our needs, right? What's the problem? So very briefly, he thinks utilitarianism fetishizes goods, right? What kind of goods do we need to raise the marginal level of utility to make people happier, right? The lexemin conception, right? That again, this notion of total utility equality, right? Its problem, as he sees it, right, is that it doesn't take into account the particular situation of each individual person. In other words, it lacks empathy, as Sen sees it. And in Rawlsian conceptions of equality, on his view, let's see exactly where his critique of Rawls is. Here it is. If people were basically very similar, then an index of primary goods might be a good way of judging advantage. But in fact, people seem to have very different needs, varying with health, longevity, climatic conditions, location, work conditions, temperament, and even body size. So essentially, Rawls wants to prescribe a one-size-fits-all solution to this question of equality. Okay, well, then what's Sen's positive contribution then, right? If utility or utilitarianism, total equality, the total equality, total utility equality, view, and Rawlsian view can't address this issue adequately, and no combination of the three can address it adequately, what should we do then, right? So he being Sen, he winds up the article with a couple of observations. One, he says, it's not my contention that basic capability equality can be the sole guide to the moral good. So again, he recognizes that right off the bat. This isn't the only thing we need, right, to come up with a greater conception of the overall good for individuals in society, right? We also need to take into account rights. We need to take into account justice, a lot of the things that obviously we've been talking about extensively throughout the semester. So he goes on to note that while it is my contention that basic capability equality has certain clear advantage over the other types of equality, I did not argue that the others were morally irrelevant. Basic capability equality is a partial guide to the part of moral goodness that is associated with the idea of equality, right? Second, the index of basic capabilities, like utility. Utility just means it's useful, right? Can be used in many different ways. Basic capability equality corresponds to total utility equality, and it can be extended in different directions, right? And he goes on to note that the bulk of the lecture was devoted to his critiques, again, of utilitarianism, total utility equality, and Rawlsian equality, right? But he notes, I made a constructive claim also that this gap can be narrowed by the idea of basic capability equality, and more generally by the use of basic capability as a morally relevant dimension, taking us beyond utility and primary goods, right? Again, beyond what he calls this fetishism. So very briefly, what is this basic utility or basic capability equality, right? He gives us an example. Take a disabled person with marginal utility disadvantage, right? We saw that utilitarianism would do nothing for her. In fact, it would give her less income than to the physically fit. Nor would the difference principle help. It will leave her physical disadvantage severely alone, right? She did get preferential treatment under Lexamen and more generally under criteria fostering total equality. Her low level of total utility was the basis of her claim, right? Because he has to consider, right, that she is no worse off than others in utility terms despite her physical handicap because of certain other utility features, right? The important point is that despite her marginal utility disadvantage, she has no total utility deprivation, right? So what's the upshot, right? If it is argued that resources should be devoted to remove or substantially reduce the handicap of the handicapped person, despite there being no marginal utility argument, right? Because it might be expensive, right? Despite there being no total utility argument because she is contented, and despite there being no primary goods deprivation because she has goods that others have, right? The case must rest on something else. And here's Sen's point. I believe what is at issue is the interpretation of needs in the form of basic capabilities. This interpretation of needs and interests is often implicit in the demand for equality. This type of equality I shall call basic capability equality, right? So we want to be able, right, in short, on Sen's view, and this is completely understandable, to have the opportunity to do what others do, right? It's not anyone's demanding, oh, I want things handed to me, right? But I want the opportunity to be able to do that, and that's what he's talking about. He talks about this basic capability equality.